I'm really happy to be here joining from my in-laws' house in Lexington, Kentucky, not far from my farm, which does not have very robust internet. And I'm reading from Landing's A Crooked Creek Farm Year, which, oh, I've got the blur on because that's not going to work. So, but I will be sharing screen so you can see a little bit of the book. Let me hold it really close so you can see what it looks like. There. That's where we want it. Okay. It's a story of, or really, it's kind of a series of essays, entries about a year on our farm. So it's structured in this very daily way where there's one picture and one piece of writing on every page all the way through. Sorry for the blur. So I'll just read a few of them. And share my screen. Okay, this is Saturday, January 19th. And this is, give a little bit more context. We're a family of 3 people. We've been farming for 15 years at this point. We are making the majority of our living from delivering vegetables through a CSA program to a community of about 60 CSA shareholders. And our daughter is 10 years old. My partner is David, and I'm struggling this year with struggling and also experiencing some joy and excitement this year with bringing the artistic part of my life and the farming part of my life in closer proximity to one another. They'd been segregated for most of my experience up until this year. So I'd managed to resist farming sort of infiltrating my artistic life and my writing life, and felt like that was an important way of protecting my time and my mental space as an artist, because farming was so all-consuming that I felt like I needed to escape from it when I did art. But then this year, I began to embrace it for complicated reasons that are told somewhat in the book. So, Saturday, January 19th. Father and daughter are having a philosophical argument about eating the steer, Lou, who's soon to be slaughtered. After darkness falls, Phoebe and I sit together in the hayloft talking about Lou. She's angry, she says, and afraid and sad. I understand, I tell her. My first introduction to the world of farm animals was through Charlotte's Web and Watership Down, books in which animals are virtually human, and farmers are among the villains. It has taken becoming a farmer myself to learn just how closely woven life and death are on the farm, how a farmer can be bound by affection to animals, even while killing and eating them. Like most farmers, we feel the role of economic necessity in nearly all of the decisions we make. I want to protect my child from the stark requirements of that necessity so that she explores the outer reaches of her own imagination. I also want to teach her about it so she will know her own privilege, respect the limits of our lives, and know in her bones the feeling of hard work. As it is, she only works on the farm under duress. So I was raised vegetarian. I was not raised on a farm. I did live in a cabin without running water or electricity, or sort of a shack, really, for part of my childhood. So I'm familiar with roughing it from early on. But farming's different, you know. I mean, we could be, my parents could be sort of counterculture vegetarians and live off the land and not have to negotiate some of the complex issues of where our food came from. This is February 3rd. Driving back from town earlier today, I noticed the particular snow late winter along Crooked Creek. That's our main waterway, which defines the geography of the book. This snow throws the topography of the landscape into sharp tonal relief. It illuminates the corrugated paths on the hillside that malnourished horses have trod and cropped, glows in tire ruts, wreathes and crowns the junk scattered in people's yards. It glitters, embroiders the wreck, drapes over and spoons up against the things that usually make me sad. Back at home, I stay in the barn, splitting wood until it is too dark to see clearly. I step outside and the snow tells a story of our recent movements, prints and paths of sleds, carts, feet, paws, car tires, a story written days ago, but only now revealed, as if it had been written with invisible ink. This is now jumping forward into April 30th. We are gathering wild garlic, Allium canadense, on the banks of Crooked Creek when we hear the flute-like song of the Baltimore oriole for the first time this spring. Each year, a pair of orioles nests in the shagbark hickory 100 feet from our front porch. And each year, the male sings the first 8 notes of the spring concerto from the 4 seasons. I wondered if Vivaldi had plagiarized an oriole until I learned how much their song varies by region. I heard an oriole once in Bourbon County, 30 miles from here, singing a completely different tune. I've read that an oriole may return each spring to a particular tree to raise young. Those young fly south and fall, thousands of miles, then return to this tree the next spring. This can continue for generations. Here and in their winter homes, orioles choose places that resemble one another, fields dotted with trees. In other words, they like small farms like ours. Maybe there's a woman on a farm in El Salvador or Mexico who hears this same song. The oriole carries a long, shining thread that stitches us together. Some might call our farm a backwater, but the vast world is present here. The fences and walls we erect and protect mean nothing to a songbird. This farm's population is largely a migrant one, and that population is always in flux. I'll just read one more. I'll skip this one. September 10th. Lily is our cow. Lily's milk still has too much colostrum, just given birth. David milks to relieve pressure since her calf doesn't need nearly as much as she produces. Cassie gave birth to a heifer calf. Cassie is her Lily's other daughter. Cassie gave birth to a heifer calf on Thursday night. We loosely tie Lily's head to a post so she won't move too much during milking. Afterwards, David castrates Lily's calf by binding the neck of his scrotum with a heavy elastic band, which cuts off blood flow to the testes. Soon they will slough off. The calf lies still before the job and after. Out in the field by the pear trees, we've caught a raccoon in a have-a-heart trap, but we don't have a heart. David will shoot it in the head. To make this an ethical act, we should eat this creature, but we're not that hungry. Today has been an ordinary day on the farm. We tied our cow's head to a post. We put a tight rubber band around her baby calf's nuts so they will shrivel and fall off. We shot a raccoon in the head. We do all of this with the aim of producing our own food, taking responsibility for our actions, not leaving the difficult decisions and dirty work to someone else. That explanation does not exculpate my sense of failure at being good. Often it seems that goodness is perched on a razor's edge. Okay. Thank you for listening. I'm going to pass the baton over to Kristine Langley Mahler, whose book, The Curing Season, she will introduce to us, and then we will talk about that. And I just want to say that it's a brilliant book.
Well, thank you. I just want to thank Stephanie and Patricia for having me here with Malaprops, and I'm excited to talk more with Arwen in a few minutes too. I'm going to be reading from an essay called A Fixed Plot, which my book takes place during the 4 years that I lived in Eastern North Carolina in Pitt County. So hello, fellow North Carolinians. And because I lived there from ages 10 to 14, what better place to describe than the mall? So this is from A Fixed Plot. To write about the graveyard at the mall is to avoid the metaphor of the mall as graveyard, which has become a trope without teeth. Everyone already knows traditional malls are dead. Malls are haunted by the ghosts of the adolescents we once were. Teen spirit stench cobwebbed in the high ceiling corners, empty benches bowed by that old desperation to belong, that feeling I came to the mall to obscure. I was raised as a suburban girl, and so malls have always been places of transformation, a collection of commerce promising that a fistful of bills could turn my white Keds knockoffs into two-toned simples, alchemizing me from unpopular to popular. If money was spent in the right stores, in the right items, with the right labels, if I was carrying the right shopping bag through the right food court when the right kids were waiting to be picked up by their parents, I was sure I could purchase my way into position. In 1663, the King of England granted proprietary rights over North Carolina land to 8 men, the Lords Proprietors. 7 of the proprietors sold their shares by royal request back to the crown in 1729, but not Sir John Carteret, great-grandson and inheritor to the estate of the single remaining Lord Proprietor, the Earl of Granville. The crown frowned at the disobedience of Sir John, who finally agreed to surrender any claim on the rest of North Carolina in exchange for the ability to hold tight to the land that was his, a 60-mile strip of land along the top of the state, scooping up what would become Greenville and Pitt County. When I was 10, my family moved to Greenville, a town on eastern North Carolina's coastal plains that was surrounded by 300-year-old tobacco fields. I was an archaeology-obsessed child, collecting information from the artifacts of Pitt County they'd proudly put on display in the white columned town library. I was enthralled by the history of my new homeland. I didn't know that it hadn't actually become my new homeland, that my sheer presence in a place didn't convey belonging. It didn't take long to learn. There were 2 malls in Greenville. The Carolina East Mall was located across the highway from the neighborhood into which I'd moved. I would ride my bike to the Carolina East, $1 and a nickel tucked in my front jeans pocket, and wait in line at K&M cafeteria behind the old folks for a slice of cheesecake. I accompanied my mom as she purchased miniature brass teapots and tiny wooden flour and sugar canisters from Millie's for her shadow box. The Carolina East was dying, even in the mid-90s. It was easy to steal a rainbow star pin from the dollar store to smack on my backpack like the cool girls in my grade. But the real mall was near the university, and it was called the Plaza. The Plaza had better stores, the big Brodies with the huge junior section, the larger Belk, the glamour shots, the afterthoughts, the Bath and Body Works purveying the spray lotions that were required in the Epps Middle School girls' locker room, the Take 10, where I swapped quarters for tokens, directing the claw over and over again, the prize always slipping out of my grip. Versions of ourselves died every time we entered a mall. At least I wish they did. In the parking lot of the plaza, there is a walled-in cemetery. A 4-foot-high brick fence surrounds a graveyard with tombstones jutting through the cement. I couldn't believe it when I'd first peered over the wall, walking from my mom's parking spot to the mall entrance. A cemetery? At the mall? The nice mall? White weathered marble is spaced in even rows, with a few newer looking granite stones. The names on those markers are easier to read. The cemetery is filled with the Evanses dead. The Evanses of the eponymous street bisecting Greenville. The Evanses tracing back to Richard Evans, town founder, who had staked his claim nearly 300 years earlier, securing his family in place. There was an Evans girl in my grade, though I never went to X's house, never called her. We weren't even in classes together. We just played on the same school basketball team one year, softball another. She wore tomboyish long shorts, even though fingertip length was in fashion, oversized t-shirts, pulling her hair into a low-slung ponytail every day, like a burden she didn't want to acknowledge, but could not remove. I've spent a lot of time looking up the Evanses. I suppose I'm looking for those missing teeth from the Sharks, sown in the million-year-old mud of Greens Mill Run, the creek entrenched in the land the Evanses once owned. I know how to access the Pitt County Property Records website. I looked for the evidence of longevity, the grip hooks in the ground, because I wanted to white knuckle their comfort, squeezing until it turned into a curse. When I lived in Greenville, history was embedded in nomenclature. Girls had the same names as their mothers. Boys were either 3 or 4, or their first names were their mother's maiden names. The counties continued to generate their ancient namesakes. There was a Rowan and a Carteret, the outgrowth of Sir John Carteret, in my grade. My new teacher asked me what school I'd moved from, and I answered, Wilson. My teacher smiled and named a couple of teachers she knew up in Wilson, and I realized she thought I had moved from Wilson, North Carolina, a town 40 miles away from Greenville. I corrected my teacher, disclosing that my school was actually named Wilson Elementary. I'd moved from Oregon, and she grew disinterested, snapping, "Oh," before turning away and beginning class. Anyway, I recite the story of Cotillion again, that narrative of exclusion that never wavers no matter how often I tell it. How the Pitt County parents of 5th graders in Lindale and Brook Valley and Lake Ellsworth and my neighborhood received registration materials. And my bewildered Minnesota-raised parents asked me once, in passing, if I was interested. Of course I refused. I was 10 and terrified of boys. I didn't know that I was the only girl from Club Pines who would not attend. I cannot be certain I was the only girl from Club Pines who did not attend. But in the bleachers before school on the mornings after cotillion classes, I felt like the only girl who'd not seen a sweaty palm reaching out as Build Me Up Buttercup began Carolina shagging, the only girl not retracing the old swing steps of her parents' summer romances out on Emerald Isle. I have a memory of my school bus driver picking up the Evans girl in the morning once from a house I admired on a lot that bordered Greens Mill Run, the big white pillared house that looks exactly like Tara in Gone with the Wind. But after researching the property, I can't connect the longtime owners of the home with the Evanses or with X's mother's family. Maybe I've just sighted X there, standing with purpose in a place that looked most like what I'd imagined belonging to the Southwood. And that's where I'll stop for now. So, looking forward to talking with Arwen about place for sure. All right, do you want me to get started? I've got questions I'd love to ask you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, let's jump in.
All right. So I was taking some notes while listening to yours. I mean, I've got my copy of your book. Love your book. And it was very moving to actually hear you reading while looking at the images, because I find that when I was going through the book the first time, my eyes were going from side to side, and both of us use images in different ways in our work, but it was really nice to be able to just focus on the deeper layers that were part of the art, and while listening to what you were saying about it. And I understand place, it's integral to your book as a whole, and it's something I understand and very much relate to. So I was wondering maybe if we could talk about how hard it is to decide what to share, and particularly for you as an artist, to decide what one picture would most, what scene would most be an emblem of the entries that you chose to include.
Yeah, it's it's a good question, and it was pre-answered for me by the fact that the drawings predated the writing, so the writing responded to the images, and in fact, I did the drawings and just took quick notes over the course of the year, and then actually wrote the book years later, weaving together those quick notes, other more extensive journal entries, and then historical context where that was called for to kind of deepen the story. But the writing, the writing both responded to the drawings and then would depart from the drawings. Like the drawings were sort of a jumping off place for the writing.
Did you ever worry that there were parts that you were leaving out, that you had chosen the drawing ahead, and then later did you worry that perhaps it didn't give you enough, like that, if you, for instance, pulled out an old calendar and looked at something and were like, oh, I chose not to include that, but obviously I can see that happened that day. Did you worry about that, or did you just say, I'm going to go because this was the dominant thing?
Yeah, I worried about that. I'm a worrier, and I worry about everything that I think about, probably just about. I worried about that, and there were a couple of instances where I felt like I missed a drawing that was important that year, and I went and I drew it later. That was only the case with 2 of the drawings in the book. Otherwise, they all happened that year. But I also had to. I had to trust it as a document from a moment in time, and that was sort of the concept from the beginning, that it is an artifact of dailiness over the course of a particular year.
I love that, an artifact of dailiness. I felt like that was what I felt like that was kind of what I was trying to do with my book. Some of the essays in there, I was trying to use an artifact of what had made up my days, and yet I also, as a worrier, I kept thinking, I was aware of how much I was leaving out. You're always aware of what you're leaving out, and I tried to cram as many things as I could remember into mine, but it is hard to recognize that the memory can only hold so much, and even our own documents that we use as sources to come to, they also can only hold so much. Yeah.
And you're I had to limit the writing to 1 page. There was just this sort of sonnet-like restriction on me. But there's this. I love the intricate structure of the curing season, and the way that each essay in it has its own form, and then the content reflects that form in a really beautiful and intricate way, and the depth of that I found just dazzling. So I wanted to ask you about that, and I see that our books resemble each other in our concern about belonging, our questions about belonging to a place, and in your case, there's sort of a pushing and a pulling from that place from a distance. It was this moment of your life, well, longer than a moment, but several years of your life when you were young. And to me, I was coming from somewhere else and have dwelled in a place and tried to reckon with what it takes to belong in a place and to a tradition that is was unfamiliar to me and always will be in some way. But I just want to say, like, I asked you earlier how to pronounce this, and I'm going to get it wrong, I'm sure, but there's one essay called Madkenfanger.
Machenfanger.
Something like that.
I mean, German speakers, if you're listening, forgive us.
Forgive me. Yeah, that is just it's about, it's one of those little things that you two people stick a finger in, and it's about your friendship with somebody which had that dynamic of, like, it was okay if you were going towards each other, and you couldn't escape it if you started to pull away, and the structure of it is like this palindrome that meets in the, so there's like this mirroring structure of pushing and pulling, and the way that you use the language, so is like you highlight, you put certain words in bold so that the reader knows what it is that you're up to, and I wondered how you chose what the forms would be, because it is very visual work. It's not only a literary work.
Well, I love the opportunity to talk about Machenfanger. I felt like I never got to talk about that one enough, and I love that you brought that one up. And I mean, form is fascinating to me. I love seeing all the different forms nonfiction can take. And so it started as kind of, Machenfanger started as one of those like weird discoveries where I was thinking about, I remembered having an old finger trap. And so I was, as a nonfiction writer will do, Googling, what is the history of finger traps? How did they? And when I saw that it originated with the term, it's a term out of Germany called Machenfanger, and it was called girl catcher. And I thought, okay, now okay, I know what, the subconscious brings the conscious and the two meet together. And for me, it was like, I knew exactly what I wanted to write about with that. I knew, the immediate thing I thought of was my friendship with the girl I call Annie in the book. And so the discovery connected to the form, which gave me the content. And so of course I wanted that to be visually reflective because, I think it can add another layer when you do that. And I love when I read work that shows you kind of the process on the page, something I feel like I do with a lot of the forms that I used in my book to kind of illustrate, like in shadow box. I don't just talk about having a shadow box, I actually make a shadow box on the page so you can see that too. And I think that, you're talking about how, you've been getting used to, you're living somewhere, it's somewhere you'll never, you don't have the history of, but it's where you've decided to be and you're settling into that. And I feel like the only way I've been able to write the essays that are in curing season are because I did choose a home. I mean, I'm living outside of Omaha, Nebraska, and I've been here for 14 years straight, 16 years total. And only having that settled place gave me the confidence to go back and look at the places that I didn't feel at home. And in particular, to come into the years I spent in North Carolina. And the forms that, kind of came out with those essays, it wasn't intentional. I didn't sit down and go, let me write a book with a lot of fractured forms about the time there. It was more like I was writing all of the essays separately. And when I tried to put them together to look at them as a book, I went, oh, isn't that interesting? I seemed to have needed to create structure out of that time because I felt unstructured, or conversely, and I'm never quite sure which one it is, either I felt like there were structures that I didn't control, and so now I was going to create them in my book. So I'm not sure, and it doesn't really matter, but I'm glad that it comes through in the book in the way that it does. How do you feel about, your structures are clear. Did you want to keep the book ever as solely the art, or did you always want it to be paired with the writing as a way of informing the art, or did you want it to be the writing and use the art to inform it? Or, I mean, or did you always see the two needing to be presented together?
Yeah, it was one of those instances where from the beginning I knew what I wanted the form to be, and it was just the text and the images on facing pages, and carrying somewhat equal weight, although I think that the text sort of bows to the images because of the way that they defined the whole project. So it was, I felt that because the exploration of the year had so much to do with exploring seeing, that I did want to keep that sense that every entry explores to some extent the art, not every entry explicitly, but there is a thread running through of what does it mean to live an artful life, and is art allowed in all spaces, and how do we conceive of what are the limitations that I have brought to this rural life by understanding it as not allowing for art, and and then at the same time I was raising a child who was artistic, and as all children are to one degree or another. I mean, we all have imaginations, but she was in a school system that was sort of stifling her creativity to some extent. So there were questions about how to pass along the heritage of the place, the meaning of what I was doing, and there was a real tension between staying and leaving for her that I was reckoning with. So all of that had to be done in the text, and then the images were sort of a respite in some way. Like the images were always a like the images take a different kind of time and attention to create than the words, if that makes sense. So there's,
for sure,
it's just dwelling in one moment. It's dwelling in one moment for a long time to create the space of it.
Well, and I know you said that you constructed it by doing the art first and then later going back and writing into the art to see it. But it makes me think a lot about how using, the depictions that you made of where you were, I mean, it's a way of reshaping the land and understanding your home through your filter, and seeing into the art that can be found when you're here, in a way that just doing a diary documentation would have, it might have felt more like, again, a collection of evidence as opposed to the interpretation that you gave as well. And so seeing the two together, it's showing how they cross. And I think it's a beautiful combination. I mean, I can't imagine either without the other. I just wanted to ask the question nevertheless.
Yeah, it's a fair question. It's a good question. Well, I'm fascinated by what you said about how you needed to really land in a place and know what it felt like to belong to a place in order to write this book that in which, and maybe, I mean, did you need that sense of belonging in order to recognize how important belonging was to you at the time, or did you always understand that?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, everybody has the moment, and the trauma breach of my life was leaving the place. I hadn't even recognized that I had a home when I lived in Oregon before. It was just, this is a place of home. And then we moved somewhere where I wanted to belong, couldn't belong. And then we left that years later, 4 years later, and we lived in another city in Indiana where I lived for 4 years before I went to school, to college. And so those years, were really critical in, I think, defining the effort that one puts into home. And, as a child, you don't really have a lot of say. You have to go where your family is. And I hadn't really thought about how deeply it hurt that I couldn't just innately belong to the place that my parents had selected as home. And so I don't think I was able to see it. And I mean, when I would talk about those years, I would frame it mostly in relation to the friendships that I had that did or didn't work out. And it was, I think, only after I really entrenched myself here in a place I selected as home as an adult and started raising my own family, and that I was able to see that it wasn't just the friendships that defined, that place for me. It was that desire to belong to a place, not just to desire to belong in general, which, I mean, again, every, I think, 10 to 14-year-old has that in them to some extent, but to really have belonged to a place, I couldn't have recognized that until I felt secure, I think.
Have you heard from anyone from Pitt County since the book came out?
So I'm actually only still vaguely in touch with two of the girls who I knew there, both of whom I know on social media in various ways. And, I contacted them to say, hey, I know we haven't talked in a long time, just so you know, you're in the book. And one of them was very gracious and, said like, oh my gosh, you wrote about those years. Teen years were tough on everyone. I was like, listen, I know they're tough. It's not about that. but no, I mean, a lot of them, I have no idea. I mean, I have an idea of what became of them because I have Google, but we're not in touch.
Yeah. And just people that you don't know from the county who maybe are interested in the history, anything like that?
I mean, I would recommend to anybody who's interested in the history to get the Chronicles of Pitt County. You can request it through your local library, like I did the first time. Get it on interlibrary loan because it's out there. But I haven't heard from any, I would say, random Pitt Countyans or Greenvillians, but what is random? I guess I could be defined as random in the end.
Well, one of the things I admire about the book is that you, and I want to be sure I say I haven't gotten to the end yet, but I've got about halfway through it. And one of the things I admire about it so far is that it is about those hard years, and you're not pointing fingers at others. You're putting yourself on the hook as much as anyone else, and it's a very authentic exploration of the challenges of displacement and belonging and coming of age and all that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was very important to me that this not turn into like a litany of look at how all these girls hurt me, because I mean, it goes both ways. It always goes both ways. And I also was definitely, part and parcel of most of those encounters through my own demeanor, my own actions, my own inactions. And I feel like I said this recently in an interview, but I think it's really important to say it again, that, when you are the author, you are the one bothering to bring these stories to light. So you have a responsibility to remember your own culpability, because they might not get to say, hey, it didn't go this way, to anybody other than the person standing next to them. I'm the one saying, hey, here's how it went, and it's my version, but
Yeah.
So I definitely wanted to make sure that everybody understood. I am aware. I'm aware that I'm a part of it.
Yeah. That is a sort of a terrifying position to find yourself in, isn't it?
It's the glamour of memoir.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think, Stephanie, if you've got any questions for us from the audience, I think we're ready.
Excellent. Thank you. It's been great to hear you both read and to talk with each other about your books this evening. Thank you so much. So we do have a question from the audience, and I'll go ahead and remind folks now that if you do have questions, there's still time to go ahead and get those in, either through the chat or via email. This one came in to us from email. It's from Paul K, who says, "Hi, Arwen. I found your comic about the death of your mom very moving and effective. And do you plan to make more comics?"
Yes, that's been, well, hi, Paul. Thanks for joining. Yes, I've done about maybe 50 pages of comics about my mom that are part of that same narrative. And and that was in the aftermath of her accidental death. And then I learned, I had so much that I was learning about her, and I was pretty close with her, but then I learned so much about her after she died that I hadn't known, that I had to kind of put aside the comics in order to just write for the last year or so, to kind of sort out what I know. And there are some pretty big family secrets and things that need to be unpacked. So I love comics, and I want to weave. I'm not sure if with that project what form it will take, because there is so much. Essentially, my mother's story was silenced, and it's an intergenerational story. So there's so many words there that it's really hard to do in comics. I just really need to free the voice. So I'm not sure whether that project will be comics, but yes, and in short, I do plan on doing more comics in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you, Arwen. And while we're sort of on the topic of what might be coming next, let me just ask both of you what that you can share. And Kristine, I know we mentioned that you have something in the works due out next year. So Arwen, what might you be working on or see coming down the road for folks, in addition to what you were just talking about in terms of comics potentially?
Yeah, it's really this this manuscript that I'm almost done writing the text part of it, and then after I get some perspective on it, I've been deep in it for a couple of years. First doing the drawing comics end of it, and now working on the text part of it. I'll decide whether I can kind of manage to fold back in the comic form or the images, or whether it's going to be 100% text, and then see about publishing it.
Great. And Kristine, can you tell us a little bit more about what you have coming up?
Sure thing. So I have a book coming out in 2023. It was going to be spring, but I think we're actually pushing it back to fall because we need to expand it a little bit more. It's a book called A Calendar is the Snakeskin, and it's forthcoming with Autofocus Press. And it is, and this is very, I'm going to have to like pair back up with Arwen again, because it's about a year of my life. It's a span of a year, looking at a period in time when I was really receiving what I thought were signs from the world around me. I was looking at astrology and eclipses, and snakes kept appearing, and I was getting feathers along my path, and looking for ways in which I knew I needed to transform. And I kept being reminded of what they were, and I kept resisting it. Ghosts were appearing, and I hate ghosts. So I had to look at why they were showing up, because I'd spent my life trying to avoid them. And ghosts of both the metaphorical and literal and self-created were just coming at me. So it's a book kind of examining that in 3 parts, processing just the things that I needed to transform and the ways in which I was resisting, and then eventually allowing it to occur.
Well, we have that to look forward to. That sounds great. And maybe you two can pair up again.
That would be great.
um, so, so we've talked about what you have coming up, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you produce what you've produced so far, and what you've been working on. Just a little bit about your process, which in this case for Arwen, it also doesn't just include writing. In general, like we're mostly talking to the folks who write, but also sometimes folks who do visual art as well. And you've mentioned a couple of times that at least in the case of Landings, the art came first, and it sounds like what you're working on now, the art comes first. And so I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how your projects start, how the drawing comes along, how the writing comes along, and I'm also specifically interested in how you fit all of this in farm life, which I know from friends of mine who farm is a pretty demanding way to live. So we'll start with you, and then Kristine, I'd love to hear about you and your writing life and your processes as well. So Arwen.
Yeah, well, my life was really uprooted by this trauma, really, of my mother's death a few years ago, and it just changed everything. The whole structure of my days. Partially because my daughter had just moved in with my mom to start high school. My daughter kind of needed to get away from our rural school system, and she got into an arts magnet school in Lexington, where my mom lived, which was an hour away from us. And so we had kind of figured out this whole structure of her living with my mom, and then my mom died, and I was disrupted by living in Lexington to help my daughter get through school in my mom's house. And so this does have a literary story that goes along with it, because there was this fascinating thing that has been unfolding since then of being in her house, surrounded by her books, learning from her journals this massive, just devastating secret that she kept, that has to do with sexual trauma during childhood, and very violent, and then things that I knew about my grandmother and my great-grandmother's history that connected with that, and then finding just little signs of it in her books, like things that she wrote in the margins of texts that she kept, and then her journals, which were fragmentary, and so I've been. It feels as if all of her books are speaking to me, and I just kind of checked out of the farm for those years largely. I mean, I would go back and get kind of grounded with harvesting stuff and eating, and realized I love this place, I want to come back here, I love this guy I'm married to that I don't see very often anymore, and I want to come be with him too. But it was I've been just exploring, like, how much of this can be done through collage, how much can be done through pure prose, how much do I need to process visually just through redrawing, and it feels so large that it's taking a long time to sort through all of that. And a piece of that is that this is very ironic and sad, but there was a certain amount of financial freedom that was caused by my mom's death, because suddenly I had her house, and we sold her house, and I had a little bit of money and wasn't as dependent on the farm income. So I've had a little more freedom to just say, okay, if this is the proverbial lemonade I'm going to make from these lemons, then I better do it now, because I don't know what's coming around the corner, So I'm learning a lot from that work, and I expect to be able to share more of it in the coming months, hopefully.
Thank you, Arwen. Kristine.
Yes, I mean, I love hearing about your project, because the next project I'm actually working on writing, because I've basically completed all the writing for my other book, is about ancestry and family history, and a lot of it is centered around my great-grandfather's journals, which I never knew him, but I was able to read them, and in reading them, it gave me it sparked a lot of ideas, and I've been kind of deep diving in where I came from, where my family came from, and who was displaced over the years as a result of my family living where they lived. Because, spoiler, and this is in an essay that fortunately it's coming out in fourth genre at the end of this year, I'm related to both Peregrine White, who was the Mayflower baby, and I'm also related to Hélène Deporte, who was the first white child born in French Canada. Both of them were born in 1620, and they both combined into me. So I'm looking at the, complication of what it means that I come from two sets of people who came here, displaced other people so that they could seek home. And so journals, I've been looking at those a lot. That's been a lot of my process too, and I'm processing it a lot too. I feel like when it comes to, what does my writing practice look like? What am I doing? A lot of it is just kind of sitting with and looking at things and writing toward things and wondering, if I go down this path, what exploration is it gonna lead to? And it can be hard to find time for that, because my other job, when I'm not a writer or a mother or a wife, is that I direct a small press, and that can you can pour all of your energy into a small press, and it will ask for more and more and more. Mm-hmm. And so I'm having to define very clear delineations between when is time spent loving and working on other people's work, and when am I finding the space to just create the mental energy to be able to create toward my own work. And I think, that's something that writers have struggled with since time immemorial.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and you say something really important. You've both said some really important things, I think, for anybody who's with us, who is a writer. But I've heard a lot that, of course, to write, you have to read, and that counts as work in terms of producing whatever you're going to produce. And the first time I heard anybody say that, it felt like really basic advice, but it's not to be taken for granted, I think. And so, how much of a part of your work, perhaps particularly when you're writing nonfiction, but certainly not exclusively. I think this is true in poetry and fiction, long form, short form, whatever it might be. Reading and absorbing, and actually paying attention to the rest of your life, as opposed to it just being about, I have to write this thing and just live in this world, that I'm writing about, that there's something to be said for, absorbing the rest of your life and other people's, words, to sort of get to that point. So I've heard, different takes on that same premise from each of you this evening. And it's, so I'm just talking about it because it's interesting to me to hear that expressed in different ways so often. So thank you for that. I'll thank you on behalf of any writers in the audience who needed to hear it just that way, because you've both produced work that we've been hearing about tonight, that I think can serve to really connect people to not just your experiences through the work, but to their own experiences, right? They feel very resonant. So and can inspire folks that way. So we're at the top of the hour. It's gone really quickly. I just want to thank you both again and give you the final words, as it were, for this evening before we say goodnight to our audience and to each other. And Kristine, we'll start with you.
All right. Well, I mean, of course, thank you everybody for being here, and thank you, Arwen. Thank you, Malaprops. I would like to recommend a couple of books if I can.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
Books that I am just I was so thrilled to see, because when I was writing my manuscript, I could not find anyone else writing about the sorts of things I hoped to write about. And so I'm going to recommend first Arwen's pressmate, Ashley Bryant Phillips, whose book Sleepovers came out with Hub City Press. And I was so happy when I read that, because it was like a fiction version of, you know, the only time I've ever seen anyone writing about Eastern North Carolina that wasn't on the coast. So absolutely huge recommendation for that. And then also my pressmate at West Virginia University, Nima Avashia's book, Another Appalachia, which is just so great. I love her bringing light to hidden histories, hidden that were never hidden, but just weren't necessarily being shared broadly. And I love what she's doing with that. And I, you know, those are two books just I recommend with my whole open heart.
Thank you for that, Kristine. I'm just going to go ahead and chime in on both of those books, and we've hosted both of those authors and had wonderful conversations with them. I don't usually do the like, oh, our YouTube channel thing, but the events are on our YouTube channel. You know, go ahead, subscribe while you're there, and please watch those, please, because we had a great time talking to Ashley Bryant Phillips and Nima Avashia. And a shout out, Arwen, before we get to you, which I didn't really do explicitly before, to both of your presses, West Virginia University Press and Hub City Press, because they are both producing just such worthwhile books that are really connecting people, in particular to stories that are not bound up in any sense of stereotype about the South, about Appalachia, about, you know, I think they're, in addition to being things that are well written, are doing a real service in those regards. And so always appreciate working with Hub City in West Virginia. And so shout out to those folks. And then Arwen, last words to you.
Well, I'm very grateful to have been invited to do this, to Malaprops, and really delighted to talk to you, Kristine, and to be reading your work and hearing your words and your book recommendations. And yes, Hub City has been just fantastic to work with. I'm full of gratitude for all that they do. I just bought a whole stack of books that just came out, but I can't talk about them yet. So I'm going to put in a plug for older books that I've been reading recently, which are, I've been revisiting Bell Hooks and her memoir, Bone Black, is just so wonderful and brilliant and strange, and gets inside of her child's mind in a very visceral way, but very like alive to the strangeness of the world that a child of her intelligence and sensitivity has. And then at the other end of the spectrum, one of her later books, Belonging, she's a fellow Kentuckian, and her exploration of place and her ability to synthesize an understanding of the importance of being from a place with the cultural criticism that she does. It's a wonderful book. So
wonderful. Thank you for that. Yes, to Bell Hooks all day, every day. Yeah. And I'm just going to shout out to another contemporary Kentucky writing today, who folks should read, Crystal Wilkinson.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Her book, her most recent book of poems.
Yeah, Perfect Black.
Perfect Black.
Amazing. There's now, and I'll stop because I'll just say there's a long list. We're not going to get into all that's just what came to mind, not to slight anyone, but she came to mind. And so her name had to pass through my lips since it had popped into my brain.
Yes.
So thank you again, both of you, so much. And to everyone who's been with us this evening or clicks on the video, we appreciate you. We thank you for your time. And this has been great. And I want to encourage you again to support Arwen and Kristine by purchasing their books. And Arwen's book is Landings, A Crooked Creek Farm Year, and Kristine Langley Mahler's is Curing Season. And if you can get them from Malaprops, that's awesome, or get them from your local independent bookstore, wherever you are. And we appreciate you. Please stay safe and well until we see you again. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.